What's up guys, I'm the Giant Mechanic, welcome to my channel. Today I'll be replacing both engine mounts on my 2006 BMW 330xi. Let's get into it. So I just drove my personal BMW into the shop, so the engine bay is hot. I am putting a fan on while I'm preparing everything to do the repairs so it can blow some cold air into the engine bay and cool everything down. Mostly because the passenger side engine mount is directly below the exhaust manifold. So I don't want everything to be hot while I'm putting my hands in to replace the passenger side engine mount. So if you've seen my previous videos, you already know that the first step for me is always the same. It doesn't matter if it's a small job or if it's a big job. The first thing I always do is check my parts. So I have both engine mounts from BBR Automotive. I have 2 new nuts and all the necessary bolts. This is my own personal car, so I figured why not replace all the hardware while I'm there. Another thing people don't know about the automotive business is that most of us do not have AC in the shops. So if I'm sweating, I'm sorry. It is almost 90 degrees inside here and there's no airflow, only the fans above me. So my apologies if I sweat, but we have to do what we have to do to get the job done. So let's get into the job itself. So the first thing I do is of course check the parts, and then the second thing that I always do before I start taking anything apart is I set the lift on the car to just make sure that everything is where it's supposed to be so I can lift the car off the ground. Another cool thing that I like about BMW is that it has these jack pads, so once the lift is positioned on the jack pads, I know that I am in the correct spot. The same exact thing applies to the rear. So I'm going to lift the car just a little bit off the ground. I will actually give a little push to make sure that it's stable on the lift, which it is. And now I'm going to leave it at this height because this is a perfect height for me to work on. I am a 6'6" mechanic. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this air duct off and I'm going to take the air box off because once I'm going to disconnect the engine mounts, I'm going to lift the engine up to get the old engine mounts out and put the new ones in. So I'm just going to take out these plastic pieces, preventing from them breaking or cracking. The instruction manual says nothing about it, but from my personal experience doing engine mounts, I know that sometimes just taking out these plastics because the engine is going to go up is kind of a preventative way to make sure that none of this is in the way and it won't actually lift on it and break them. So this first piece is just these 2 push clips and these 2 20s. So now without these push clips and without these 2 20s, I'm just going to take this out of the way. And then this piece right here is just held in by these little clips. So if you press into it, it should disconnect immediately. So now I'm going to disconnect the mass airflow sensor using a pick tool. I will pry on the tab and disconnect it. And then using a screwdriver, I will loosen up the clamp that holds the duct into the airbox. Gently push back. And then the airbox is held in by these 2 10mm bolts. And now I can safely remove the airbox. So again, I did all of this just to prevent when I'm lifting the engine up to break the airbox or any of the ducts up here. I don't have to take out the fan because the fan is an electric one. It is actually not connected to the engine, so there's no problem with that. Also, with now having all this space on the driver's side, I can easily access the nut that holds the engine mount on top. If you guys are still watching the video, please consider subscribing and leaving a thumbs up. It really helps my channel. Now let's go back to the repairs. So now that I have the air box and the air duct off, I'm going to lift the car all the way up. So now that the car is all the way up, I'm going to take the under tray off so I can actually reach the engine mounts from below. So the first thing I'm going to do is take off this plastic under tray that is held in by 8mm bolts, and then I'm going to take off the stiffening plate that is held in by 16mm bolts. So now that I have the engine under tray out and the stiffening plate out, I'm going to take out the cover that covers the transmission, which is held in also by 8mm bolts. So now that I have everything off, this is the driver's side engine mount and this is the passenger side engine mount. So in order to do the driver's side engine mount, I'm going to have to take out the drive shaft so I have room to actually sneak out the engine mount. On the passenger side, all I'll have to do is loosen the bolts, lift up the engine a little bit with a pole jack, and I should be able to sneak it out. So I'm going to start with the passenger side engine mount, which is held in by two E12 E-Torxes. These are how the old bolts look like. Luckily they didn't snap, but I'll still replace them with new units. So now I'm going to lower the car all the way back down, and using a long extension and a swivel, I will take the top nut off that holds in the engine mount from the top. So if you look right here where my light is shining, that is the engine mount from the top, and right here is the nut that holds the engine mount from the top to the car itself. So now using my 3/8 ratchet and a very long extension and a 16mm swivel socket, I'm going to access the bolt from the top and loosen it. Now using my long magnet, I will reach the nut so I don't have to touch the hot exhaust. And here we have the 16mm nut. Now that I have the nut off from the top, I'm going to lift the car all the way back up and use a pole jack to lift the engine off of the engine mount. So now I have my pole jack set up with 2 blocks of wood. The reason why I'm using wood is because it's soft, so when I'm pushing it onto the engine, it is better than put metal to the engine. And also, if you look at the pole jack, it kind of has these 2 high spots, so I don't want those high spots actually going into anything in the engine compartment, so that's why I'm using wood. It will even out the pressure that is going onto the metal part, and now I'm going to slowly lift the pole jack to lift off the car so I can access the engine mount. My recommendation is to always use a pole jack on a flat surface. So now I'm jacking the motor up so I can access the engine mount. You do not have to go crazy high, just enough to get the engine mount out, because you don't want to break anything, because you are actually moving the whole engine and all of the parts up, so you don't want to damage anything. So I'll lift it up right here, and that should have enough access to actually pull out the engine mount. And here you go, we got it out. So now we have the new engine mount, and we are going to put it back into its position. Now we have the new engine mount back into position. It took me a little bit longer to put it in place just because this new engine mount is not collapsed, so it's a little bit longer, and I had to kind of shimmy it out to put it back into the correct position. And now we're going to slowly lower back the engine to put it through the hole. And now that it is actually in the hole, we can lower the pole jack. We don't need it anymore on this side. So now I have my 2 new bolts in the engine mount, and I'm going to use my gun to drive them in. And now using my ratchet, I'm just going to give half a turn. So now I lowered the car back to a comfortable position for me, and using a magnet, I will install the new nut on top of the engine mount. The reason why I'm using a long reach magnet is because the exhaust manifold is still hot and I do not want to burn my hands. Now that I have the nut on the stud, I'm going to use the same long extension with the 16mm swivel and a 3/8 ratchet to tighten up the nut. So now that I have the passenger side engine mount already done, while I have it in this height, I will loosen the nut on the driver side engine mount. It's a little bit more trickier on this side just because we have the power steering reservoir, we have the air duct and all these cowls and stuff, but you can still do it from here in this little pocket right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take off the ratchet so I can just use the extension and the swivel to position it on the nut. And now that I have it on the nut, I'm going to use the ratchet and loosen it. So the whole reason why I'm even changing the engine mounts is because I started to feel when I would start the car at idle, it would shake, and it was also making a clunking noise. And you can compare the new engine mount with the old engine mount. Look how much collapsed this is compared to that. It is not supposed to be that collapsed. These are the original engine mounts made in 2006 or before that and just installed in 2006. So they definitely did their job, and now it's time to retire them. So that's why I'm changing both sides, because if I'm already doing one, why not do both? But you can definitely see how much this engine mount is collapsed compared to that one. So the only reason we are taking this drive shaft out is because we are going to use this hole to actually pull the engine mount out. If this was not an X drive, it would be even easier, but because this is an X drive, we're going to take out the drive shaft, and then through this hole we're going to take the engine mount out. So this is the drive shaft where it connects to the transfer case. So I'm going to take a paint mark and make a little indication right here. The reason why I'm putting a paint mark right here is because I want to install the drive shaft exactly how I took it off. The drive shaft on both ends is held in by 4 E12 E-Torxes. So I took the 3 bolts out, and I have this bolt partially threaded in just to hold this side up because I don't want the drive shaft hanging. So then I'll loosen the other 4 bolts, and all I will have to do is with my fingers loosen this side, and I can take out the drive shaft. The only reason why I'm doing it like this is because I don't want the drive shaft hanging down. So now I have all 4 bolts off of the other side, and now I'm going to loosen this bolt that I partially put in, and I will lower the drive shaft, and now I have the drive shaft out. So on the driver's side, there is a ground that goes all the way from here to the top of the engine mount bracket. I'm going to disconnect the ground off of here because I don't want to stretch the cable. This ground is held in by a 13 mil nut. So now I have the ground loose. Now I will take out the 2 lower engine mount bolts that are E12 E-Torxes. Now I have the pole jack placed right under the front differential, and I'm slowly going to start raising the car to access the engine mount. So now before I actually go to the engine mount, I'm going to take off this metal bracket that is held in by 3 10 mil nuts. So without this metal bracket, I will have significantly more space to pull out the engine mount. So now I finally can pull out the engine mount. And here we go. So here we have the passenger side engine mount, the driver side engine mount, and a brand new engine mount. And if you look at them, the passenger side was collapsed the most. The driver's side is a little bit in better shape, but it is nothing compared to the brand new one. Now we can install the driver's side engine mount back into position. So now that we have the driver's side engine mount into position, we can start slowly lowering the engine. The reason why we want to do it slowly, so the engine mount can position itself where it's supposed to be. And it just clicked in, so we can lower it all the way down. You want to have the engine lifted just a little bit up so you can still move the engine mount to align the 2 bolts that go in the bottom. So now we have the 2 new bolts in the bottom of the engine mount, and I'm going to use a gun to drive them in. And I'm going to use my ratchet just to give a little turn. We are going to install back the metal plate that we took off to have more access for the engine mount. And now we're going to put the 13mm nut back on the ground cable. So I installed the drive shaft back the way I took it out, but what I want to show you is that if you look right here, I have the same paint marks from where I took out the drive shaft the last time. I installed it right back into it. When you're torquing down these bolts, guys, be careful. It's very easy to snap them. So now I'm going to lower the car again, put the new nut on the new engine mount and torque it down. So now for the driver's side, I'm going to use a little bit of different technique. I put a little bit of the so-called dum-dum, which is like a very sticky Play-Doh on the new nut, and I'm going to put it into my swivel socket. This way it will not fall down, because on this side it's just tighter to do it with the magnet. The magnet wants to stick to everything. So I put a little bit of dum-dum on the new nut, and now I'm going to go back through the same hole and position it on the stud of the engine mount. Now that I have it positioned on the stud, I'm going to torque it down. And the best part is the dum-dum sticks to the socket itself, so it's not even on the nut anymore. So now I have everything put back together. I put the air box back in, the duct and this plastic piece back in. I connected the mass airflow sensor back in, put all the under the trays and the stiffening plates back on, and now it's time to go for a test drive to verify my repairs. So I just came back from my test drive. No more shaking at idle, but most importantly, no more clunking noise when I'm going over bumps. If it was only shaking at idle, I probably could live with the old engine mounts, but just that clunking when you go over bumps and it's like clicking, clicking, I just couldn't stand it anymore. So I just replaced both engine mounts, and now the noise is gone. I'm very happy with that. The noise was really driving me crazy, especially when you could only pretty much hear it going at slow speeds, like in a parking lot, and all you hear is clicking, clicking, clicking. I just couldn't deal with it anymore. I replaced both engine mounts. It is gone. So now that there's no more shaking at idle and no more clunking over bumps, I can confirm that the repair is done. It's a Saturday night and it is almost 9:45, and the temperature in the shop is still almost 85 degrees. So here was a quick video of changing the engine mounts on my personal car. Thank you everybody so much for watching, especially the ones that stayed until the end. I also want to give a quick shout out to all my subscribers. We are at 600, guys. It's an amazing feeling to see that you get the views and you get the subscribers and you get the thumbs up. It's a really pleasant feeling, and I just want to say a huge thank you for everybody who watches my videos, subscribes, and leaves a thumbs up. It is almost 10 o'clock. I'm sweating. I'm tired. It's time to go home. I hope you all guys have a great night, and I will see you soon.